how much of us are being a part of the village and helping out the students. That's where we have to change our vernacular and our diction when we do talk about our students. If you notice, I don't say my students. I say our students. I even say our Kansas City students because it's a problem overall. It's not, I'm not just focusing on Central Middle School students. I'm focusing even on the entire United States. Because like I said before, I have a goal of being a superintendent. I want to close the achievement gap. The achievement gap is my ultimate goal, not just here at Central Middle School.
You are now listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with your host, Jorge Valenzuela.
This is education coach Jorge Valenzuela. Welcome to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast, where I provide all educators, whether instructional leaders or teachers, tips on how to be their best both personally and professionally. Now let's get into it. We're here today with my new friend, Kendrick Claxton. Kendrick is an assistant principal in Kansas City Public Schools. He's also an upcoming education consultant and speaker. You might have seen him here first. I'm happy to have him on the show because I happen to be a very big fan. How are you?
I'm doing great, George, and thanks for the invite, man. I'm super stoked up just to sit here and just have a good conversation with you. All things learning. I really love this Lifelong Learning Defined podcast. I love that title, man, because just being a lifelong learner is just the first step.
It's all about personal growth and also professional growth, which I'm very passionate about. And that's why it's part of my brand. For the audience, I met Kendrick on a recent podcast a few weeks ago. He served as part guest and part co-host. So he was asking me questions. He was very dynamic, very dynamic. This brother stood out to me, and my wife saw and heard him. And she was like, you need to get him on. But I also knew that too. So that's why he's here. AK, please give us your backstory. How did you get into education? And what were your steps to get to where you are now as an assistant principal?
Just to go even back a little bit, George, on during our podcast, we definitely have some things in common, which is related to my why. I definitely want to start off with that. And I would have to say my wife started off just watching my mom take care of 10 kids by herself. And not necessarily have an education. And I just really reflected as a young kid and said, oh man, I have to get my education. And the reason why I said that is because not only do education can change your environment, it's helped with your mindset as well. So with that being said, I noticed that it wasn't too many opportunities for students that was growing up on the west side of St. Louis, Missouri. It wasn't too many opportunities for us to see men dressed up in suits. It wasn't too many opportunities for us to see men that are upright doing the right thing in their community. So I never had a role model. I just had a lot of models that I didn't want to be like. And I always said that. So one day I met Mr. McKellen. It was in high school. He's my high school vice principal. The first black man that I saw wear a suit and tie. The first black man that I saw married with a ring on his finger. And he was just a real deal unicorn to me in my world. And I stopped him and I asked him in my junior year in 2013, I asked him, hey, what could I do to be like you? He said, hey, man, let's talk about it. You got to get it first. You thing off, go to an HBCU. I was like, oh, man, what is an HBCU? I don't even know what this is. But just everything ingrained in my why is to make sure that I am a beacon of light in other students' lives, just like Mr. McKellen was a beacon of light in my life. So my why is definitely surrounded around empowering the youth, most definitely.
It's so interesting. I received a list of questions for that podcast, and my why wasn't one of them. And you hopped on, and that's the first thing you asked me. I really think people need to understand their why, but understand their purpose.
Yes.
A lot of times people know their why, but don't know their purpose, or they have a purpose and they don't know their why, then it's no real connection there. And I think that's an important thing. Our conversation made me reflect back to 2017. I had just accepted to be part of the PhD program at ODU. Old Dominion University. And my mentor, Dr. Ernestine Scott, was talking to me and she congratulated me. And then she said to me, you're a role model for people like you.
Yes.
Even if you don't know it. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm more connected to hip hop culture than Hispanic culture because of the way I was raised and where I grew up. And she said, in 2001, when I got my PhD, I was in the 11th percentile for African-American women earning a PhD. She said this, I'll never forget this. I would imagine that you're even lower than that for Hispanic Americans. So you're a role model, whether you know it or not.
Right.
Ever since then, I tried to put that into my why.
Mm-hmm.
My purpose is always to improve teaching and learning. That's my passion.
Oh, definitely.
But part of my why is helping people like myself and helping people from my background and from my culture and who've been through similar things. I appreciate you and bringing that up and even bringing it up here today, even though I didn't ask you about it. Thank you, brother.
No, most definitely. And just to even piggyback or echo the same thing, man, my why is the number one thing I focus on during trials and tribulations. If you don't have a why, that's what I focus on a lot, George.
For the audience, if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, your why should never be about money. Should never be about money. Now, the purpose of a business is to earn a profit.
Right.
But don't get it confused. Okay. How did you get to where you are now as an assistant principal and administrator at Kansas City Public Schools? And if I didn't say it, Kansas City is a dope city. It's a fun city. I love Kansas City. There you go, bro.
I have this acronym of HWD. HWD stands for hard work and dedication. That's exactly how I got into this seat. And not only that, I would have to say my passion for my why, which is aligned through my why, that I feel like sitting in the seat as a teacher, I really didn't have too much of an impact on the students abroad. And what I mean by that is basically the policy changing. See, my goal even to sit in this seat now is not just to stay in this seat. One day I plan to be a superintendent where we have policies in place that can mitigate us being in the 11th percentile or us even being lower than that. We actually have to go up against some of those things. And I would have to say, just sitting here at the middle school setting, man, I had a major impact on so many different student lives. And not even just the students. Now I get to interact with all stakeholders, such as the parents, our partnerships. It's really ingrained in my why how I got into this position right here. I would really have to say that.
If you're watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify or iTunes, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the like button and share this episode with your family, friends, and colleagues who are interested in self-improvement through lifelong learning. And now for a word from one of our sponsors.
Education is changing. Classrooms look different, and the future demands that our students be equipped for whatever comes their way. Educators play a huge role in helping prepare students for their futures. Defined Learning is a K-12 standards-aligned PBL solution that provides high-quality cross-curricular performance tasks across content areas such as ELA, math, science, social studies, computer science, and more. The hands-on projects are based on real-world situations and allow students to apply their learning. Education is changing. Give students the tools and experiences to recognize their futures and make an incredible impact on the world. Defined, the authority on applied learning.
We had the pleasure of listening to George this morning on project-based learning, and he shared his story that his aunt encouraged him to go into education. And she was absolutely right. He is so talented at sharing information in a way that is easy to digest and is inspiring to go back and actually implement and make change.
So my takeaway is that Mr. Valenzuela was very inspiring. He was very motivational and helped me to think about a new way of getting my teachers excited.
When I set out to do a workshop, my key deliverable is energy. And this momentum is used to make connections, inspire, educate, and ultimately transform the audience so that they're compelled to take that same energy back to their schools and communities. And although we have fun, we tackle the hard topics of today, like educational policy, pedagogy for improving curriculum and instruction, and empowering today's students by connecting our work to the needs of the workforce. So please consider Lifelong Learning Defined for your next keynote, workshop, or conference, and overall instructional and educational coaching needs. My name is George, and I hope to connect with you soon.
We would love to have him come and do some work with us and help us be a little more successful and help our students to be more successful.
I move around a lot of schools, and we're seeing a huge disconnect. A lot of teachers that have come from non-traditional pathways, especially in the past few years. And so just interactions, expectations is really the first step. All of my teachers, raise your right hand, and please repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my students. All of my administrators, all my directors, all my principals, all my coordinators, raise your hands, please, your right hand, and repeat after me. I promise that I will speak positivity into my faculty and staff. Thank you. Kay, as a teacher or administrator, what is an obstacle you were faced with, and how did you overcome it?
I would have to say an obstacle that I was really faced with as a teacher that was working in the urban community. I was faced more with having to deal with the social emotional side of our students, basically making sure that they have hot and cold water. Did you eat? Because a lot of those different things play a factor. And when I say they do not even teach this in school, social emotional is the top thing before we can even get into education. Because most of our students are worried about, some of our students are worried about, hey, where's my next meal coming from?
I agree.
Are the lights on? Last night I had the police were at my house, so I couldn't get any sleep. So I had to take a lot of those things into consideration with my practice because, hey, I can't dive into content if the students are worried about everything at home.
Right.
That is like one of the obstacles I would have to say I faced as a teacher. And that's why I'm sitting in this position now. I'm glad that, hey, I can mitigate some of those problems for the teachers that I govern now.
For the audience, I was an inner city kid in Far Rockaway, Queens, New York. And I had a lot of teachers like Kendrick. Now, I'll be honest, back in the 80s, I'm a lot older than you, Kendrick. Back in the 80s, my teachers didn't look like you. Wow. Maybe like one or two. Majority were a lot different. They would drive in from the suburbs and they would work with us.
Yes.
What I'm hearing here right now, that love that you have and that care for their social and emotional well-being is what I experienced as a kid, which enabled me to learn. Folks out there, I think this goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
If there's certain things that you don't have, if you're not safe, if you're not fed, if you're not warm, if you don't have a roof, all these different things, then you're not going to be ready to learn. As an academic researcher and practitioner, 4 things I've seen that young people will need to master in order to learn. They have to achieve. They have to see little successes. If they don't see those, then they're not going to be motivated. Yes. The other 3 things are motivation, engagement, and attendance. And if young people are not coming to us with these skills and attributes, we have to put the horse before the cart.
Yes.
So that the horse can eventually pull the cart effortlessly. That's the thing. If we do like what Kendrick said, we're not lowering expectations or rigor. We're meeting kids where they are. Last word, brother.
You brought in a great part of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I always used to tell when I was the content leader, I used to tell my social study team, you guys, we could not Maslow's before we bloom. So we have to do the Maslow hierarchy of needs before we can get into the Bloom taxonomy of things, before we get into the depth of knowledge, before we get to asking students the questions. They have to have those hierarchy of needs met.
Amen. For a word from one of our sponsors. If you're a STEM and PBL teacher like me, you're always on the lookout for new project ideas and resources. You know George does PBL, and I'm telling you, look no further than SmartLab. SmartLab really has a fresh take on STEM and PBL. I'm proud to be a partner, and they sponsor the podcast. But just don't take my word for it. Check out what other educators are saying about SmartLab.
When students enter into SmartLab, they are allowed to think outside of traditional norms.
It gives them a lot of agency. They feel empowered and important. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of the SmartLab environment and the way the project process is set up.
SmartLab becomes this place where they can do those things and have the time and space to communicate better and even deal with social emotional stuff. They're having a bad day. A SmartLab's a place where we can change the pace of what they're learning to match their mental needs for the day. And that comes back tenfold later on when they want to be there and they want to learn and they want to do stuff and they feel safe and they feel like they can get the things they need.
That's one of the big benefits of being in more of a collaborative environment is it makes you have to work. It makes you have to be accountable.
please look in this episode's show notes for a link to connect with Smart Lab. Kendrick, I can't just invite you here and not dive into your work a little bit. I had to research you. In diving into your work, brother, I'm seeing that you put a lot of emphasis on uplifting Black youth. For educators who teach Black youth, who aren't Black ourselves, what is your message for us?
That's an excellent question. And I would just want to start off by saying leading with empathy. Leading with empathy will lead to building relationships, not just relationships of, hey, what's your favorite color, but having those real, authentic, intentional relationships. Hey, what's going on? To where a student is comfortable enough to share with you, hey, I couldn't charge up my iPad, or I couldn't do this certain thing due to the fact that my lights were off. Those are relationship building things. And then leading with empathy. We're not saying that you have to sympathize with them or even lower the expectations that of the bar that we are setting. We're just basically saying when you're making the decision that incorporates these student lives or even the adult lives, let's make sure we're leading with empathy of what their concern is or what their problem is. And see how could us as the leaders in the building or even in the room can mitigate certain challenges from us meeting our goal. So I would have to say empathy, leading with empathy, and building relationships.
I do love that. Now, I've traveled to 31 states and over 70 cities in our country, and I've been traveling since 2014. I can't say this is entirely true, but I haven't found any evidence of educators that don't care about our kids.
Yes.
I've seen instances where they have sympathy and love for our kids. Sympathy meaning that when something goes wrong in the community or in the children's lives, they do care. But I'm not so convinced that they have empathy, which is what you said.
There you go.
If they're coming from a different generation, a different culture, or different background, maybe the same culture, but not the same generation.
There you go. That was excellent.
There's a breakdown there.
Yes,
and then there's also biases adults have that they don't realize they're showcasing that in their interactions with kids.
Yes.
And the thing with kids is this. I read this in The Four Agreements. It's by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Yes, it is.
And he said this: when someone hears something, they either agree or they disagree. And the problem that young children have, young teens and young adults as well, they tend to believe whatever they hear.
Yeah, yes.
You see what I'm saying?
No.
We need to empathize and also be aware of what we believe about children in order to help them appropriately.
Most definitely. I think you brought up a great point of really having to not lower the expectations, even when we're talking about the subject of empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is knowing that, hey, this child didn't eat during this time, knowing the child didn't eat or the child couldn't charge up their electronic device. That sympathy is saying, hey, take a break. You don't have to charge it up right now. I know what's going on. Take a break. No, we want to make sure that we're showing empathy. We want the kid or the student to continue on their journey of education. But hey, let's make sure that we are taking away the roadblocks away. That's the number one thing, because sympathizing is just saying, hey, you're not learning anything from it. You're just saying like, hey, this is okay. But no, I want to make sure that we are teaching students that, hey, if we run into a hard place, you do have resources around that can help you. Because guess what? Like, man, the whole entire generation, my entire generation before me says it takes a village. How much of us are being a part of the village and helping out the students? That's where we have to change our vernacular and our diction when we do talk about our students. If you notice, I don't say my students. I say our students. I even say our Kansas City students because it's a problem overall. It's not, I'm not just focusing on Central Middle School students. I'm focusing even on the entire United States. Because like I said before, I have a goal of being a superintendent. I want to close the achievement gap. The achievement gap is my ultimate goal, not just here at Central Middle School.
For the audience, sympathy and empathy are not the same thing. Don't get them confused. Sympathy is to feel sorry for someone's situation or their circumstance.
Yes.
Although there is a place for that, sympathy doesn't help anyone. Kendrick, tell us about any upcoming projects, such as a book or any conference you'll be speaking at.
Now that I'm in my doctoral degree, I wish I can speak at a conference. I wish I can. The last conference that I actually spoke at was at the Teacher Quality Retention program through the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. When I say that this is a dynamic, oh my God, professional development for inspiring teachers and now even inspiring administrators or teacher leaders. This program I spoke at, and we went over difficult conversations on how to navigate difficult conversations. And I would have to say most teachers or even administrators does not have that key aspect of being a listener. Sometimes we are always in that role of, hey, let me find a solution for this. Let me give it to you, without even really being intentional about what am I listening to? What is the actual problem that I can actually solve? How could I be an actual help to this student or even to this teacher? How could I help with this?
Anyone watching or listening, I know that you see that he's very dynamic. He's a great speaker, very knowledgeable. Kendrick, how can people find you so they can book you to speak at their school or at their conference?
I am on all platforms of LinkedIn with my name, Kendrick Claxton. You should see it right here. There you go. Kendrick Claxton. I am on Facebook as well. Kendrick Claxton is my name on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I am on all of those platforms. That's where they can really find me.
I'll put all those links in the show notes.
Yes.
What a perfect way to end this show. That's it for this episode. Until next time, this is the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast. Whether you're a teacher or administrator, you lead by walking alongside your students and your staff. You teach them what to do. You model for them. Let's say you're in a situation where you don't know what to do and you bring in a coach or a resource, you learn alongside them. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Now, the second thing is this. Give your people feedback, not pushback. Whoever you push back on, whether physically or verbally, they're going to do it right back immediately. And if they're intimidated by our position, our status, they're going to do it behind our backs and ruin our programs. My guy. I want to leave you on this note. Trajectories can be changed. When I was in 10th grade, here's a snapshot of who I was in 10th grade. There's a rapper named Rakim. I'm not sure if you guys know about Rakim, but he used to say, it's not where you're from, it's where you at. And I played that on my headphones at 16 years old every day until I believed it. And I'm showing you this because I'm seeing versions of this throughout American schools. This is your reality of what you have to face. If I can do it, any kid can do it, but they have to work hard. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with Jorge Valenzuela.